I was 66 years old the first time I noticed my own hands shaking over something as simple as a boy carrying a box. That morning in rural Virginia began like so many others. The kettle whistling on the old gas stove, the radio murmuring low in the background with the farm report, the smell of damp earth slipping in through the loose kitchen window. My days had become a long, quiet hallway of habits. Feed the cat, water the roses, wipe the table even when it was already clean. I had come to believe that this was all there was left for me, a house that creaked in familiar ways, a yard that grew wild whenever my back hurt too much to bend, and a silence that had begun to feel less like peace and more like a slow fading. I didn't resent it. I had decided, in that practical, resigned way older women do, that my life had already had its story. Everything now was just the credits rolling in a dark theater after everyone else had gone home. I didn't even notice the moving truck at first. Out here, a mile outside the little town of Walden Ridge, you learned to ignore the road unless you were expecting company, which I never was. The sound drifted in under the radio, gravel crunching, an engine shifting into park, 2 doors slamming shut. I almost turned the volume up to drown it out. It was only when Daisy, my old tabby, jumped off the windowsill and puffed up like she'd seen a ghost that I went to the sink and pushed back the curtain. The house across the dirt road had been empty for almost a year, its porch sagging, its paint peeling like dry skin. Now there was a pickup truck in front, and a young man was lifting a box out of the bed like it weighed nothing. At first I thought he might be one of those day laborers people hired from the next town over. But then he set the box down, took a deep breath, and just stood there, looking at the place like someone trying to make peace with a bad decision. There was something so raw in that expression that it felt wrong to be watching. I was about to turn away when he lifted his head and his eyes met mine through the glass. It was ridiculous how fast I looked down, as if I'd been caught spying like a nosy teenager. My heart gave a strange little hop in my chest, and I remember thinking, with a flash of irritation, that at my age, any odd feeling there could mean a heart attack. I wiped my hands on my dish towel. There was nothing on them. They were bone dry, and forced myself to look up again. He was still standing by the truck, still watching the house, but now and then his gaze flicked toward my kitchen window, like he knew I was there, even though the glass was smudged and the curtain half closed. He was young, obviously, mid-20s at most, with sun-browned arms and a plain gray t-shirt that clung to him in a way I tried not to notice. Dark hair, messy like he'd run his hands through it one too many times, a pair of worn jeans, boots that looked like they'd walked more miles than his truck had driven. When he finally bent to grab another box, I stepped away from the window as if I'd been burned. "You're being silly, Helen," I muttered to myself, setting the kettle off the burner. "He's a neighbor, not a ghost, or a movie star." I carried my tea into the living room, past the photographs that lined the walls like a museum of a woman I barely remembered. There was my late husband, Tom, grinning in front of his first tractor. There we were on our wedding day, my hair dark and thick, my waist small enough that the dress now looked like it belonged to another species. There were the kids, long gone to cities and lives that did not include regular visits back home. Emily with her lawyer's blazer slung over one shoulder, Mark holding his first baby, my grandson, who now only called on holidays when he remembered. All of them framed, frozen, safe. None of them knew anything about the life I was about to stumble into, and even now, thinking back on that morning, there's a part of me that wants to reach through time and warn myself, "Close the curtains, Helen. Make your tea and sit down. Do not go outside." But I didn't know then what that day would become. I only knew I was curious, and loneliness does strange things to your pride. After half an hour of pretending not to glance out the window, I saw him wrestling with a lawnmower that looked older than he was. It had probably been left behind by the last owner, who never took care of anything besides beer and football. The young man yanked the cord, frowned when it didn't start, and then tried again, harder, the muscles in his forearms tightening, his jaw clenching just a bit. Without deciding to, I set my tea down and walked to the door. A breeze slipped in as I opened it, carrying the smell of cut hay from the fields and the faint scent of gasoline from the mower. I told myself I was just being neighborly, that's all. Out here, people helped each other. That's what I had been taught, back when the town felt bigger and the church pews were full. You took casseroles to grieving families, you waved to strangers even when you didn't like the look of them, and you certainly didn't let a young man break his back over a broken machine when you had a perfectly good one sitting in your shed. It had nothing to do with the fact that I suddenly wanted to hear another human voice, one that didn't belong to the radio or to my memories. I walked down the front steps slower than usual, conscious of the way my knees popped and my ankle complained. Gravel shifted under my garden shoes as I crossed the narrow road. He saw me when I was about halfway there and straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Up close, he looked even younger, though there was a tiredness around his eyes that I recognized from my own mirror. For a second, we just stared at each other, and time did a strange thing. It loosened, thinned, like I was standing in two ages at once, 66 and 16, the girl who once made boys stutter at the county fair and the woman who now avoided her reflection under harsh bathroom lights. Then he smiled, and it was the kind of smile that starts cautious at the corners and then takes over the whole face. "Hey, ma'am," he said, with a slight southern drawl that softened the edge of the word. "Sorry if I'm making a racket. This old thing doesn't want to cooperate." Something fluttered in my chest at the sound of ma'am. It was respectful, but it also drew a line between us as clear as a fence. I clung to that. I needed that. "Oh, don't worry," I answered, surprised at how rusty my voice sounded. "This road's heard worse. Looks like that mower's more rust than machine. The Pullmans left it, didn't they?" He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah. I thought I could coax it back to life, but I think it's decided I'm not worth the effort." He stuck his hand out like we were meeting at a job interview. "I'm Luke Harris. Just moved in from Roanoke." His palm was warm, calloused. I felt the strength in his grip, but also the uncertainty, like he wasn't sure how firm to be with someone my age. "I'm Helen Moore," I replied. "I live across the way, and I've got a mower that actually works if you want to borrow it." The words came out quicker than I meant them to, too eager, and I fought the urge to clear my throat and start over. His eyes, hazel, I noticed now, lit up with a relief that made him look even younger. "Really? That would be great, Ms. Moore. I've got grass up to my knees in the back, and the landlord made it real clear he doesn't care what the house looks like as long as the yard doesn't scare the neighbors away." I surprised myself by laughing, a small, rusty sound that seemed to shake something loose inside me. "Well, too late for that," I said. "I'm already here." For a heartbeat, our eyes met again, and there was something there, something quick and hard to name, that made my skin feel too tight. Then he looked away, toward the house, and the moment passed, leaving behind a thin residue of shame. "Ridiculous," I scolded myself silently. "You're old enough to be his grandmother. This is kindness, nothing else. That's all it can be." I led him across the narrow gravel road toward my house, feeling suddenly self-conscious about the cracked paint on the porch railing and the weeds I'd meant to pull from the steps. Luke followed quietly, his boots crunching behind me, and I realized with an unexpected pang that it had been a long time since anyone had walked beside me like that. I heard the soft sound of him breathing, smelled the faint trace of soap and engine oil that clung to him, and every step seemed to make the air between us heavier, like the weight of something I hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. The shed door stuck, as always, and he came up behind me to help. "Here, let me," he said, his hand brushing mine as he took hold of the handle. The warmth of that touch startled me, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was alive. I hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone had reached toward me without hesitation. The door gave way with a loud groan, and he grinned like a boy who'd just won a small victory. "There we go," he said. "Guess it just needed a little convincing." I found myself smiling back before I could stop it. "Everything around here does," I murmured, half to myself. "Even me." He didn't hear me, or maybe he pretended not to. We rolled the mower out together, dust rising in the sunlight. I pointed out where the gas can was, giving instructions I'd repeated to my late husband 100 times before. Luke listened with that quiet attentiveness I'd almost forgotten existed in men. No interruptions, no jokes, no impatience. Just focus, the kind that made you feel seen. When he started the engine, and it roared to life on the first pull, he laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to echo through the open field and into the empty corners of my heart. "I owe you one, Ms. Moore," he said over the noise. "You can repay me by bringing it back in one piece," I called back, trying to sound casual. He tilted his head, his eyes catching the light. "You got it." I stood there as he pushed the mower down the road, his shoulders straight, his stride easy, and for a moment, something inside me ached in a way I didn't recognize. It wasn't the sharp pain of grief I knew so well, nor the dull ache of loneliness. It was something softer, more dangerous, a reminder of being wanted, once upon a time. I turned back toward my house, angry at myself for even noticing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the hum of crickets outside and the faint, steady ticking of the clock in the hall. The moonlight spilled across the floor like milk, and I thought about Luke, about his hands, his laugh, the way he'd said my name. It wasn't desire, I told myself. It was gratitude. That was all. But when I closed my eyes, I saw him again, sweat glinting on his skin under the sun, the way he'd looked at me when he smiled. Not pity, not politeness, but something honest, something human. It had been years since anyone had looked at me like that. The next morning, I found the mower neatly parked by the shed, cleaner than when I'd loaned it. There was a note tucked under the handle, written in hurried, slanted handwriting. "Thanks again, Ms. Moore. Couldn't have done it without you. I'll stop by later to return the gas can. Luke." I held the paper for a long moment before setting it down on the kitchen table beside my cold cup of coffee. My fingers trembled slightly, and I laughed at myself. What was I doing? Acting like a schoolgirl because a young man had written her a note. When he came by that afternoon, I was in the garden, pretending to trim the roses, though my mind was miles away. He leaned on the fence, a faint smile on his face. "You've got quite the garden, Ms. Moore. My mom used to say a person's flowers tell you more about them than their words." I looked up, surprised. "Your mom sounds like a wise woman." He hesitated, the smile fading a little. "She was. Passed 2 years ago. Cancer." I stopped what I was doing, the clippers hanging loosely in my hand. "I'm sorry, Luke." He shrugged, trying for a smile that didn't quite make it. "It's all right. She was the kind of woman who thought everything had a purpose, even pain." I nodded, my throat tight. She was right. Sometimes the worst things are the ones that teach us how to breathe again. We stood there for a while, not speaking. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees, the soft hum of bees near the roses. I felt an odd connection then. Not the foolish, reckless kind, but something deeper, born of loss, of shared silence. Two people standing at different ends of life, both trying to find a reason to keep showing up. He started coming by more often after that, sometimes to borrow tools, sometimes to ask advice about fixing things around the house, sometimes just to talk. I told myself it was innocent, and maybe it was, at first. He'd sit on the porch while I made lemonade, and we'd talk about small things. The heat, the price of gas, the way the sunsets out here always seem to linger a few seconds longer than anywhere else. But then he'd laugh, or look at me a certain way, and I'd feel that strange warmth again, the one that scared me more than loneliness ever had. One evening, when the sky turned pink and gold, he told me about his fiancée, or rather, his ex-fiancée. "She didn't like small towns," he said, staring out at the fields. "Said she felt trapped. Guess I didn't realize until too late that maybe she felt trapped with me." I didn't know what to say. My heart ached for him, and, selfishly, for myself. For all the ways I'd been left behind by people who couldn't stay. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "people run not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to love in the same place twice." He turned to look at me then, really look, and something passed between us that I still can't name. A mix of gratitude, pain, and something far more dangerous. When he smiled again, softer this time, my heart betrayed me. It fluttered like it hadn't in decades. That night after he left, I sat on the porch long after the fireflies came out, trying to understand what was happening to me. Shame crept in like an uninvited guest. I was old enough to know better, old enough to remember how judgment feels when it lands on a woman's shoulders. But the truth was undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Hey, if you're still here with me, I want to say something from the heart. Stories like this one aren't just about forbidden feelings. They're about courage, about facing what we've buried inside ourselves for too long. If Helen's story touches you even a little, stay close. Leave your thoughts below. Tell me if you've ever felt judged for something your heart couldn't control. This space isn't just for watching, it's for sharing, for being human together. And if you'd like to keep walking through stories like this, I'd love for you to join us. Hit that subscribe button, not as a number, but as someone who understands what it means to feel deeply. The days that followed blurred into the kind of late summer heat that made everything slow down. The air, the thoughts, even the guilt. Luke would come by in the afternoons, sometimes with a jar of honey from the local farm, sometimes with nothing but that shy smile and a question about something he claimed he couldn't fix on his own. I told myself he just needed company. I told myself I was being kind. But deep down, I knew that what tied us together wasn't need. It was recognition. Two people who'd lost something they couldn't name anymore, finding pieces of it in each other. One afternoon, I was baking a peach cobbler when I saw him through the window again, leaning against his truck, waving a hand in the air like a boy trying to get a teacher's attention. "Door's open," I called out, pretending not to notice how quickly I'd wiped my hands on my apron. He stepped in, his boots leaving faint marks on the old wooden floor. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, smiling. "You baking for someone special?" I laughed, though it came out softer than I meant it to. "Only for whoever happens to wander by, hungry." "Well," he said, leaning against the counter, "guess I came at the right time." We ate together at the kitchen table, two mismatched plates, steam curling from the cobbler, the window open to the sound of cicadas. He talked about his job at the sawmill, how the work was hard but honest. I listened, studying the way he spoke with his hands, the way his laughter filled the room like light. When I told him about Tom, my late husband, he listened the same way he did with everything I said, without pity, without trying to fix it, just there. "He was a good man," I said, tracing the rim of my cup, "the kind who didn't talk much, but you always knew where you stood." Luke nodded slowly. "That kind of quiet's rare, hard to find now." "It was easier to love someone steady," I admitted. "You always knew what to expect." He smiled faintly. "Guess sometimes it's the surprises that make life worth it, though." I looked up then, and the way he was watching me made my chest tighten. There was something unspoken in that silence, something dangerous. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My throat went dry, and I finally stood, breaking the spell. "You want more cobbler?" He didn't answer right away. "No, ma'am," he said finally, voice lower now. "I've got more than enough." That night, I stood at the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair slower than usual, my reflection blurred by the soft light. I saw the lines around my eyes, the silver at my temples, the tiredness that time leaves behind when it stops trying to be kind. But beneath it all, I saw something else, something alive, and it scared me. I pressed my palms to the sink and whispered, "You're too old for this, Helen. Too old for nonsense." But my heart wouldn't listen. The next Sunday at church, I caught whispers. Walden Ridge was small. People noticed things. Luke had offered to help me fix the fence, and apparently someone had seen us talking in the yard, laughing. Just that, a laugh, and already the eyes began to follow me down the pews. I'd forgotten how sharp small-town silence could be. Mrs. Tanner, who'd known me since before Tom died, gave me one of those smiles that wasn't really a smile at all. By the time I got home, I could feel the shame creeping in. It wasn't guilt over Luke, it was fear. Fear of being seen, judged, reduced to gossip and pity. A woman my age wasn't supposed to be noticed, and if she was, it had to be for something respectable, not for talking too long to a man young enough to be her son. I stayed inside for a few days after that. I told Luke I wasn't feeling well, though the truth was that I didn't know what I was feeling. He left a bag of groceries at my porch with a note that said, "Take your time. I'll be around." The kindness in that simple line undid me. I sat on the porch steps, reading it over and over until tears blurred the words. One evening, there was a knock on the door. The sky outside was dark, the kind of dark that feels heavy. I opened it to find Luke standing there, holding a jar of soup. "You weren't at church again," he said softly. "Just wanted to check in." I wanted to tell him to go. to protect him, to protect myself. But instead, I stepped aside and said, "Come in, Luke." We sat at the table, the same one where we'd shared cobbler, and talked in low voices. He told me he'd heard the whispers too, that people in town liked to talk because it made them feel less alone. "I don't care what they think," he said. "You should," I whispered. "They'll turn it on you, Luke. You don't deserve that." He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Maybe I don't deserve you, Helen. But I don't care what they say." The words hit me like a storm breaking open. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, I felt seen not as someone's mother or widow, but as a woman who could still make someone's heart stir. I reached across the table before I could stop myself. My fingers brushed his. The world went silent. Just that small touch, electric and terrifying. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. That night, after he left, I cried. Not because I regretted it, but because I didn't. The days after that were a blur of confusion. Part of me wanted to run, to bury the feeling before it could take root. Another part, the part that had been quiet for too long, wanted to see where it led. Every look, every small kindness felt like a confession we both pretended not to understand. But the town was watching. And sooner or later, I knew, whispers turn into storms. The week that followed was heavy with whispers. I could feel them even when no one spoke, like the air itself had turned into something watchful. The mail lady stopped staying for coffee. The clerk at the grocery store, who'd once asked about my grandkids, now kept her eyes on the register. I told myself it didn't matter, but in a small place like Walden Ridge, silence had a way of suffocating you. I tried to keep my distance from Luke. I stopped answering his calls, stopped walking by the window in the morning when I knew he'd be outside. I told myself I was doing the right thing, protecting him from the small-town cruelty that always needed someone new to feed on. But every night, I'd find myself standing by the porch light, staring at the dark shape of his house across the road, waiting for something I couldn't name. One evening, there was a storm, the kind that comes out of nowhere. Sky split open, thunder shaking the walls, rain beating so hard it drowned every thought. I was sitting by the window when the power went out, and for a few long seconds, I sat there in the dark, the sound of the storm filling the room. Then over the rain came another sound. Knocking, sharp, hurried, desperate. When I opened the door, Luke was there, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to his forehead. "You okay?" he asked, breathless. "Saw your lights go out." I should have told him to go home. I should have said I was fine. Instead, I stepped aside. "Come in before you catch pneumonia." He hesitated, then nodded, stepping inside. Water pooled on the floor as he shook off his jacket. The storm roared outside, and for a moment, the only light came from the flash of lightning through the window. He looked around, shivering slightly. "Guess I didn't think this through," he said with a nervous laugh. I found a towel and handed it to him. "Sit by the fire. I'll make some tea." We moved around each other in silence, the kind that feels too full. I could hear his breathing, the soft clink of the teacups, the storm pressing against the windows like it wanted to come inside too. When I turned around, he was standing closer than I expected, towel draped around his shoulders, eyes searching mine. "Luke," I said quietly, "you shouldn't be here. People already—" "I don't care what they say." His voice was steady, but there was something in it. Not anger, not defiance, but truth. He took a step closer. "I don't care what they think, Helen. You make me feel like I can breathe again." My heart clenched. "You don't understand what this could do to you." He shook his head. "I do. But it's worth it." The words hung between us, heavy and impossible. I could feel the heat from the fire behind me, the cold rain outside, and the weight of everything unsaid pressing against my chest. "Luke," I whispered, "I'm not who you think I am. I'm tired. I'm stubborn. I'm scared. And I'm—" He cut me off gently. "And you're alive. You think I don't see that?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The storm raged outside, thunder rolling like a warning, but all I could hear was the quiet sound of my own heart beating against years of silence. I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to tell him to stay. Both truths lived in me at once, clawing against each other. "I've spent so long trying not to be seen," I said, my voice shaking. trying to stay small enough to fit inside other people's comfort. He looked at me, eyes soft but unwavering. Then stop. Just this once, Helen. Stop hiding. When he said my name, something inside me broke. I felt the years between us like a chasm, and yet, somehow, it didn't matter. For that single moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The judgment, the shame, the whispers, all of it washed away by the storm. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. The touch was barely there, but it felt like a confession. I closed my eyes, not out of surrender, but out of fear that if I opened them, I'd see the reflection of everything I wasn't supposed to want. "Luke," I whispered, "please." But he didn't move closer. Instead, he stepped back, hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't come here to make this harder for you. I just needed to know you were okay." The restraint in his voice hit me harder than desire ever could. He turned toward the door, and before he left, he added, "You're the only person who makes this place feel like home." Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, the storm echoing in my chest. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. What replaced them was something heavier, the realization that I was no longer invisible, and that scared me more than loneliness ever had. When the storm finally passed, the world outside was quiet, washed clean. I walked out onto the porch, the board slick under my bare feet, and looked across the road at the faint light coming from Luke's window. It flickered like a heartbeat. I whispered into the night, though he couldn't hear me, "What have we done?" Over the next few days, I kept my distance again. But something had shifted. The way I looked at myself in the mirror, the way I moved through the house. For years, I'd lived like a shadow of who I'd been. Quiet, invisible, waiting for time to pass. Now, every corner of the house reminded me that I was still here, still capable of feeling, even if it hurt. But I also knew that small towns remember everything, and rumors have a way of growing teeth. It wasn't long before I'd find out just how sharp they could be. By the end of that week, I couldn't walk into town without feeling the weight of their eyes. It was as if every word I'd ever said, every kindness I'd ever given, had been erased by a single rumor. The looks weren't cruel outright. No, small-town judgment wears a gentler mask. It comes in polite smiles that don't reach the eyes, in pauses where greetings used to be, in the way conversations stop when you enter the room. At the grocery store, I saw two women by the canned goods aisle whispering. I knew both of them. I'd baked pies for their church fundraisers, prayed beside them at funerals. One of them gave me a quick nod, tight-lipped, then bent her head toward the other. I didn't need to hear the words. I could read them in the stiff set of her shoulders. Shameful, desperate, foolish, words that cut deeper than any shouted insult. When I got home, I stayed on the porch for a long while, staring out at the road. Luke's truck wasn't there. For the first time in days, the quiet didn't comfort me. It suffocated me. The world had turned small again, smaller than it had ever been. That night, Luke came by after dark, headlights off, moving like someone trying not to be seen. When I opened the door, his face was tired. "I heard what they're saying," he said quietly. I crossed my arms, though my hands trembled. "You shouldn't have come. They'll only talk more." He shook his head. "Let them talk. They don't know us." I laughed then, bitter and low. "They don't need to. Out here, the truth doesn't matter, Luke. Only the story they tell each other." He stepped closer, searching my face. "And what story are you telling yourself, Helen? That you're too old to be cared for? That you don't deserve something good?" I looked away. "I'm saying it's not fair to you. You're young. You still have a whole life ahead. You shouldn't waste it defending a woman everyone's already judged." He was silent for a long time. Then softly, he said, "You think I came here to rescue you? You're the one who rescued me. You just don't see it." His words broke something in me. For so long, I'd worn strength like armor, widow, mother, survivor. But in that moment, I realized strength wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about letting yourself be seen, flaws and all. We sat on the porch steps, the night pressing close around us. I could hear the hum of crickets, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. Luke leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "When I moved here," he said, I thought I was running from my life. But you made me remember what it feels like to belong somewhere, even if it's just for a little while. I swallowed hard. Belonging doesn't last long around here. People like us don't get happy endings. He smiled faintly, though his eyes were sad. Then let's stop waiting for one. Let's just live what we have, for as long as we can. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But deep down, I knew the world wouldn't let us stay untouched. The next morning proved me right. When I went to get the mail, there was a letter taped to my gate. No envelope, no signature, just 4 words written in sharp, angry strokes. Have you no shame? I stood there, the paper fluttering in my hand, the words bleeding into my skin. My throat burned. The whole town felt smaller now, crueler. For a moment, I thought about packing up and leaving, just getting in my car and driving until the road ran out. But then I thought about Luke, about the way he'd looked at me that night, not with pity, but with something close to faith. I tore the letter in half, then in half again, until the pieces scattered across the grass like snow. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted the salt on my lips. That evening, Luke came by again, worry etched in his face. You all right? He asked. I handed him the crumpled remains of the letter. This is what happens when people like me forget our place. He frowned. People like you? I nodded. Women who stop apologizing for getting old. Women who dare to feel when the world tells them they shouldn't. He took my hand then, slow and deliberate. Then I guess the world's wrong. I looked at our hands, his young, strong, calloused. Mine worn, freckled, lined with the map of years. Somehow they fit. Not perfectly, but truthfully. The next day, I went to church. Alone. I walked through the front doors with my head high, even though my knees trembled. I sat in the same pew I always had, and when the whispers began, I didn't look down. When the preacher spoke about forgiveness, I felt the sting of irony and let it wash over me. After the service, Mrs. Tanner approached me. Helen, she said, her voice sugar-sweet and sharp underneath. You know people are talking. I met her eyes. Let them. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something like peace. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was the quiet strength that comes from surviving judgment and choosing not to bend under it. That night, Luke came over again, and we didn't talk much. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in bruised gold. The world still whispered, but for that brief moment, it felt far away. I'm leaving soon, he said after a while. Got a job offer out west. I nodded, swallowing the ache that rose in my throat. You should go. You deserve more than this place can give you. He looked at me then, a long, heavy look that said all the things we couldn't. You'll be okay? I smiled, though my eyes burned. I've been alone before, but this time, I won't be lonely. He reached out and brushed his thumb over my hand, a gesture both goodbye and thank you. Then he stood, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the fading light. When I went inside, the house felt different, not empty, but full of echoes. The kind that linger when something real has passed through. I stood in front of the mirror again and studied the woman looking back at me. She wasn't ashamed anymore, just alive. If you've come this far, thank you for staying with Helen. Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that ask us to see ourselves, the longing, the mistakes, the small acts of courage we hide behind quiet smiles. If this story touched you, share a piece of your own in the comments below. Tell us about the moments that changed you, the ones that made you braver. I read every single one. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, not just to follow the next story, but to be part of something honest, something human. Because deep down, we're all just trying to find the courage to start again. It's strange, the quiet that comes after goodbye. It's not empty, not really. It's more like the air settles differently, heavier in some places, lighter in others. Luke's truck was gone by morning, leaving behind 2 tire marks that cut through the red dirt like scars. I stood by the window watching the sun crawl up over the ridge, and for a long while, I didn't move. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. The days that followed unfolded slowly, like an old photograph developing in water. I went back to my routines, the garden, the morning tea, the creak of the rocking chair. But something had shifted. Every simple thing carried a pulse now. The roses smelled sharper, the coffee tasted stronger. The silence wasn't as lonely as before. I'd spent years living like the world had already decided who I was allowed to be. A widow, a mother, an afterthought. But now, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who'd lived, who'd dared, who'd been brave enough to let her heart wake up again. One afternoon, I found something tucked beneath a loose board on the porch, a folded piece of paper. My breath caught as soon as I saw his handwriting. Helen, I didn't say goodbye right. I didn't know how. You once told me that sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing when to let it rest. I think I understand that now. I'll carry you with me, not like a wound, but like a place I belonged to once. Don't hide from the world anymore. It needs people like you, people who still believe that feeling something deeply isn't a mistake. Luke. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears come, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. He hadn't saved me, and I hadn't saved him. We had simply found each other at the right moment, in the right kind of loneliness. And sometimes that's enough. That evening, I walked down the road to where the fields opened wide toward the horizon. The air smelled of rain and cut grass, and the light slanted gold across the hills. I thought of Luke, somewhere out west, maybe watching another sunset, maybe thinking of Virginia. I hoped he was happy. I hoped he'd found someone to make him laugh again. But even if he hadn't, I knew he'd carry peace where before there'd been pain. I sat on the fence post and looked out at the sky, the colors melting together like watercolor. I remembered the first time I'd seen him, standing in front of that old house with a box in his hands, looking lost. I remembered the storm, the letters, the laughter, the way he said my name like it was something worth remembering. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled without sadness attached to it. That night, I took down the old wedding photos from the hallway. Not to forget Tom, but to make space, for memory, for air, for whatever came next. I left one picture up, the one of me alone in the garden, smiling at something off camera. I looked at that younger version of myself and realized she'd been waiting for me to come back all these years. Weeks passed. The town quieted. The whispers faded, as they always do when there's a new story to tell. Mrs. Tanner started waving again when she passed by, though I could tell she didn't quite know how to meet my eyes. That was all right. Forgiveness doesn't always need to be mutual. Sometimes it's just something you give quietly to yourself. One morning, the mail brought a postcard. No return address, just a picture of a wide desert and a short note in that same slanted handwriting. Found peace out here. Hope you did too. I pinned it above the kitchen sink, right where the sunlight hit it every morning. And I whispered, "Yes, Luke, I did." Life didn't become easier after that. It just became more real. I still had my aches, my lonely evenings, my quiet mornings, but now every moment felt earned. I started tending the garden again, not out of habit, but because I wanted to see things grow. Sometimes the neighbors' kids would stop by, and I'd teach them how to prune the roses without hurting the stems. They'd laugh and ask if I ever get bored out here all alone. I'd smile and say, "Alone isn't the same as lonely, sweetheart," and I meant it. Years later, when I was older still, I found myself sitting on that same porch, the wood warm beneath my hands, watching the sunset melt into the trees. Time had softened me, as it does everyone, but it hadn't taken my courage. The world could whisper all it wanted. I had lived, I had felt, and that was enough to fill a lifetime. I sometimes wondered if people ever understood what our story really was. It wasn't about scandal or youth or rebellion. It was about being seen, really seen, after believing for so long that you were invisible. It was about remembering that love, in any form, isn't something to be ashamed of. It's a mirror that shows us the parts we'd forgotten. When I finally closed my eyes that night, the world humming softly around me, I didn't feel regret, just peace. I'd learned that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep living with your heart open, even after it's been broken. And that, I thought, was the truest kind of love story there is.